Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Odds On Favorites podcast, where we're talking sports entertainment and sports entertainment, all with an eye on the bottom line. I'm Drew Goldfarb, joined by Rick Rockwell and Taylor Smith. We begin this week's podcast by looking at the NFL's Week 5 action in a segment that we call Show Me the Money! Lines, where we take a look at some of this weekend's NFL money lines and give you our betting picks. We begin with the Thursday night football game as the Los Angeles Rams visit the Seattle Seahawks on the night of this recording. LA a slight underdog coming in at minus 105 on the money line. The Seahawks are favored at minus 115 at home. Taylor, who do you see picking up the win tonight?
So I don't know what happened with the Rams last week. Their defense looked great through 3 weeks, and then they somehow get smoked at home by Tampa Bay. But if I were betting on this, I think I would take the value on the Rams as a dog because we don't really see that very often. I still think they are the better team overall. I'm a little bit worried about Todd Gurley and how he's just not the same guy anymore. But I think Jared Goff's going to rebound from his kind of up and down start to the season. I'm still not a full-on believer in what the Seahawks are doing. I think the Rams are still the best team in this division. And like I said, if I were betting, I would just take the value, and that's with the Rams. So siding with LA here as a bounce back.
All the people in Seattle need to send their hate mail to Taylor. He's been against the Seahawks since the preseason. I don't know what it is. He just does not like them for some reason. Yet, you have quietly one of the MVP candidates, Russell Wilson, putting on a fantastic season, leading this team to a 3-1 record. Yes, they stumbled against the Saints a couple weeks ago. I think that's more of an anomaly than it is reflective of their team. The defense is starting to gel more after they added new pieces, especially Clowney. He scored a defensive touchdown last week, and I mean, he's a beast. Just give them time. They got the running game going. They feel more confident in Carson again. He pounded the rock. Speaking of the running games, the Rams' running game it's terrible right now. Like, compared to past seasons, this is awful. There's problems in LA. I don't know what it is. I can't figure it out yet. I don't know if they're just not committed enough to the run or they just don't have confidence in Gurley like they used to, but they're not running enough. And when that defense can't play shutdown with their shutdown corners, they give up 55 points to the Buccaneers at home. That's terrible. Now they're going on road to one of the toughest places to play in all of the NFL in a divisional matchup where Seattle basically got to cruise in the fourth quarter of last week against Arizona. They'll be well rested. The Rams have to travel on a short week, even though it's not that far. It's still an inconvenience. They're coming off an embarrassing loss. There's too many question marks now with the Rams. I'm going Seattle all the way here. I think Seattle wins this game. I think they cement themselves right back in the conversation as being the best in the division. Rams got a lot of talent, but they're not putting it together. There's something missing there.
I agree with Rick, especially on that last point there. If this game was being played in LA, I would probably lean towards picking the Rams to win this game. But the game's being played in Seattle, and that is one of the toughest venues to play in for an NFL team on the road. These teams are close enough to being toss-ups. I mean, if you look at the odds, they're basically toss-ups. Minus 115, minus 105 is that far away from that minus 110 on both sides. The Seattle Seahawks being at home, a Thursday night primetime game, although because in Seattle it's technically a late afternoon game for them. Either way, I got to lean Seattle. I'm going to take the Seahawks to win this game as well. Next up, an NFC clash between the Green Bay Packers and the Dallas Cowboys. Both these teams are 3-1 in the season. Dallas favored at minus 175 on the money line. The Pack available at plus 145. Rick, which team moves to 4-1 this weekend?
You know, last weekend I said I didn't believe in Dallas. I didn't think they'd beat the Saints. I said the Saints would win at home because I didn't like what I saw from Dallas, and they played 3 bad teams. Washington, Miami, and the Giants. Although the Giants are coming back now, but at that time they were a bad team. With that said, Devontae Adams might not play, or he's banged up for the Packers. There's some question marks whether or not he's actually going to be able to play this week. And if he does not play, I don't think Green Bay has a chance at winning. Dallas's offense wasn't able to get things really going against the Saints defense. They returned home. I'm not sold on Green Bay traveling out on the road and actually beating another top team. I got, after what they just did at home with Philly, how the Eagles expose some of the weaknesses that Green Bay has. I don't feel good about taking them. And I hate taking Dallas, but I think I'm going to have to go with Dallas here at home. I think they're just going to have a slight edge in this game. I think they're pretty evenly matched up. But if Adams isn't there, then there's no way Green Bay's winning.
Yeah, the Packers defense has been impressive so far, but I think Dallas is going to be able to run the ball on them. We saw Zeke on the field for 97% of the snaps last week in New Orleans. I think he has a big game. I think Dallas just kind of controls the tempo in this one. I'm not sold on Green Bay's play calling. Last Thursday against the Eagles, we saw a bunch of questionable play calls. Like they had a 1st and goal on the 1, and they threw it 4 consecutive plays. And they threw that pick on the goal line to lose the game, basically. So I don't know if there's a rift there between head coach and quarterback or what's going on, but until we see more consistency there, I'm not really going to fully buy the Packers. I think the Cowboys are a decent value at home. I'll just take the Cowboys to go to 4-1.
I mean, you guys pretty much covered it. I'm no real fan of the Dallas Cowboys, but in this situation, I think that they're the better play. They're the more known factor. They're the home team in this situation. You got injury concerns on the other side. Dallas just makes more sense when it comes to making a pick for that game. Pair of 2-2 teams square off in Charlotte this weekend, each featuring a backup quarterback. It'll be the Jacksonville Jaguars taking on the Carolina Panthers at Bank of America Stadium. Jags plus 160 underdogs compared to the Panthers minus 190 favorite status. Taylor, are you buying into Minshew Mania? Which team stays above 500 with a win on Sunday?
I don't understand the Minshew thing. It's like no one's ever seen a guy with a mustache before. I'm not sure why it's such a big deal, but I'm not buying into him. I'm not overly impressed by what they've done, beating Tennessee and Denver, 2 very mediocre teams. I'll take Carolina at home. They've gone on the road back-to-back weeks and won with Kyle Allen. I don't think the Jaguars really have an answer for Christian McCaffrey, so I'll take Carolina at home.
Hey, look at who's coming around to Carolina. Too bad you didn't do it last.
Win the Super Bowl before the season, bro.
Too bad you didn't pick Carolina last week is all I was going to say. I'm just going to leave it at that. With that said, I think these odds are a little bit too skewed. I think Carolina's a little overvalued here. If Ramsey's playing for the Jaguars this week, he makes that defense so much better. And not only that, Minshew Mania is real. It is a real force. It is like the second coming of Hulkamania. Like the porn stash is going wild. I know Drew's going to hate me for referring it to Hulkamania or comparing it to Hulkamania, but I'm telling you, Minshew Mania is legit. From college to the pros, you give this guy a chance. He's got the swagger. He's got the confidence. He's rallied his team around him. He's turned Jacksonville into at least a competitive squad on the field. I like what Allen's done with Carolina. I picked them for Arizona, and I picked them against Houston, and I think they're a better team. But they just lost one of their best defensive players. I'm a little bit concerned going up against a really good defense in Jacksonville, what they're going to be able to do. McCaffrey's one of my favorite players in the league. He's a stud. But outside of that, if Jacksonville contains him, I'm not sold on the receivers beating one-on-one matchups, especially with Ramsey playing. I'm actually going with the upset here. I'm riding the Minshew Mania. I'm taking the value that the Jaguars are getting in their underdog role, and I'm rolling. If I could wear a porn stash right now, I would.
I think you just have to shave like this and leave. I mean, that's all that the mustache is it's a beard minus, the side and the goatee part. But yeah, it's and by the way, I mean, the fact that he looks like Uncle Rico, I think, is what struck everybody immediately. It's the, referencing Napoleon Dynamite, which was a big thing 15 years ago. So people who are now, in our age range are going to be big fans of that and just be like, hey, this dude looks like Uncle Rico. How is that possible? He's going to throw the football over them mountains, which they've done some commercials. It's very funny with it. They, threw footballs over the stadium, which were them. Anyway, I kind of like Jacksonville as a value pick here. I wouldn't go all in on a bet on them, but I just kind of like it as I think that minus 190 for Carolina in this situation is a little too much unless we are 100% positive that Ramsey's not playing. So I would just sitting here, I'd probably just throw a little flyer bet on Jacksonville. I think that that's probably the better option. I just don't know that there's really the value in picking Carolina for this game. Last one for Show Me the Money Lines. The Cleveland Browns take it on the San Francisco 49ers on Monday night. Now, before the season, a lot of people probably thought that these win-loss records would be reversed at this point in the season. The Niners are undefeated at 3-0. Cleveland got back to 500 by picking up a win 1 week ago. San Francisco favored in this game. The 49ers posting a -185 money line. Cleveland, meanwhile, would pay out at +155 if they can pick up a road win on Monday Night Football. Rick, will the Browns hand San Francisco their first loss of 2019?
Now, we all know how I've felt about the Browns in the preseason, throughout the regular season. I have not been a fan of them. I think they're overrated. I think they're a little overhyped. I said the same thing about the Ravens last week's game. I thought both teams were overrated going into that. But I really like what I saw from Cleveland. And honestly, I think they can go into San Francisco and beat the 49ers. The 49ers have beat the Bengals, they beat the Steelers, and then they beat the Bucs in week 1, which was a very close game. I think it was a Winston interception late that stopped Tampa Bay from winning. So, and then they beat 2 of the worst teams in Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, who just had an epic thriller of a Monday Night Football game the other day, which was one of the worst Monday night games I've seen in a long time. Bottom line, what I'm trying to say is, yes, you beat the teams that you play, but come on, let's not – 49ers being that big of a betting favorite over proven very little, and now they're going to go up against a team that does have some talent on offense, has a quarterback that can actually be a little more consistent than what they saw with Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, and then they got a decent defense also. They woke up Nick Chubb last weekend in Baltimore against Baltimore. That was incredible. I think Beckham and Landry will give the 49ers secondary a lot of problems. I think Chubb's going to run on them. And I just think Cleveland's going to go in there and pull off the upset. I don't like picking Cleveland in an underdog role, but I think they got some momentum going, and I'm not sold on the 49ers at all. I think they are more overrated right now than I thought Cleveland was last week.
If I had to bet on this, I would take the value that's Cleveland on the money line, but since we're just picking winners, I'm going to take San Francisco at home. I think the defense has been pretty good. They've been opportunistic with reckless quarterback play, and if we've seen Baker Mayfield do anything, it's definitely throw a bunch of picks already over the course of his NFL career. I think they can take advantage of that. Like I said, I don't love the value. I definitely wouldn't take them at -185 if we were doing legit wagers and stuff, but I do like their chances of winning the game more. So if it's just a straight up pick, I'll just take San Francisco at home.
So your pick is San Francisco, but your bet would be Cleveland for a very, very small amount.
Yeah.
Okay. Just clearing that up. I'll mark you down for San Francisco as I'm tracking our, correct, incorrect stats. But a week ago, I was the one who picked the Browns, and I said that was either going to be my last time picking Cleveland because if they lost, that was just going to be it. I was going to be done with them, swear off of the Browns for the rest of the year, just be done. They won. So we're back to a point where you go, okay, so we're now back to kind of normal-ish. This is kind of like the last pick for me a little bit, where I think that there's potential value on Cleveland. I think that the Browns they have a higher ceiling. San Francisco, I kind of agree with Rick. I don't know how much I buy into the Niners yet. And so I kind of just have to go with Cleveland because even if we know that they may not be capable of all of the craziness that a lot of Browns fans thought they were going to be doing by this point in the season, we know what they can do, and they can have good offensive output. They can put together a good game against a decent opponent. And we don't really know what the Niners are doing. The Bucs are a much better team now entering week 5 than they were entering the season. So I don't know how much stock to put into that win for San Francisco. And as Rick pointed out, their other wins it's not beating the Dolphins, but it's as close as you're going to get without having to play Miami. So I'm going to take Cleveland this week again. We'll see if they bite me. And then if they do, then maybe I try to swear off of them one more time. Let's move on to our picking favorites segment, where we look at the games involving our favorite teams. All 3 of us have made picks for all of these games, which we're going to show you in just a minute. But we're going to each break down our personal favorite NFL team's game and pick a winner before moving on to the next game. So for me, that is the Miami Dolphins, who are underdogs against a bye week this week. Despite not facing an opponent in week 5, I would still take Miami to find a way to lose this weekend. However, if there is a week for the Dolphins to not lose during the season, this is probably among their best shots. Even still, wouldn't bet against another Dolphin loss. They haven't really shown the ability to score against any caliber defense, and the bye week's defense might at least keep Miami's offense off the field. I don't know if that benefits them or if it hurts them, but I would not take Miami this week. I would take the bye week to pick up the win on the road in Miami. Taylor's favorite team is the Houston Texans, who are 5-point favorites at home against the Atlanta Falcons. Taylor, break it down for us. Give us your pick.
I don't like this at all. I obviously think the Texans are fully capable of losing another home game, as they did last week against a team in the same division as Atlanta, but the Falcons have been so bad. They're 1-3. Matt Ryan has thrown 6 interceptions already. They lost at home to the Titans last week by multiple touchdowns. Things are not looking good for them. This is kind of a must-win for the Texans. I think if they want to establish that they are the best team in that division, they can't afford to keep losing games like this at home. So I expect them to come back a little more focused than they were last week. I think they can put up a big offensive effort against this bad Atlanta defense. So as much as it pains me to have faith in this stupid team yet another week, I will take Houston at home once again.
Speaking of stupid teams, finally for Rick, his favorite would be the 3-1 Buffalo Bills, who fell to the New England Patriots last week. This time around, Buffalo visits the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee actually a 3-point favorite in this contest. Rick, how do you see this weekend playing out for your Bills?
What was so frustrating about last weekend's game was Buffalo actually had a chance to win that game. I was hoping they wouldn't embarrass themselves and they would play good football. Not only did they do that, they held Tom Brady to one of his worst games in recent memory. They held the Patriots offense to very little. They're the first team to score on New England. They played a great game defensively and showed, like I've been saying all along, they have one of the best defenses in the NFL. Now they get to go to Tennessee. There's question marks whether or not Josh Allen will play because here's the thing. Burfict, now I'm getting a little fired up here. Burfict gets suspended for the year for a hit on Jack Doyle. Josh Allen took almost the exact same hit to the head as a defenseless running quarterback. If that was Tom Brady, the Bills defender would have been suspended for the year if that happened. He only got a penalty, and that was it. Josh Allen's in the concussion protocol right now. We don't even know if he's going to play this week, and that's the only reason why the Titans spread is this high at 3. So not only am I taking the Bills in those points, I'm taking the Bills in the money line. I don't have any faith in Mariota whatsoever. And the Falcons' defense is terrible, like Taylor said. Buffalo has a tremendous defense, a better defense than Tennessee does, and they still got plenty of talent on offense, and Barkley is at least as good as Mariota is. I know you can laugh about that now, but Mariota is not good at all in the NFL. He's a very inconsistent quarterback. He doesn't make that team better. Once they shut down the run, they're going to focus on they're just going to put pressure on Mariota, and I think he'll turn the ball over as many times as Barkley might turn the ball over if it's Barkley playing. If it's Josh Allen back, then I have no doubt Buffalo wins the game. Either way, I'm taking Buffalo to win. They're going to head into the bye week, which is the following week, at 4-1, and things are looking good in Western New York.
On to college football in a segment that we call Whose Season is Over. With week 6 of the season upon us, we are guaranteed to see at least one top 10 team fall this week. Make sure to check out the latest edition of Power 5 Picks with Taylor, myself, and Jim Baviglia. We give you plenty of college football betting picks each and every week. Rick, which team or teams jump out as either being done when it comes to postseason potential as of this week or might be on the verge of it this weekend?
I think there's 2 teams. Last week I said Virginia and Cal, they both lost. Their seasons are pretty much done. This week I think it's Iowa at Michigan, and I think it's the loser of Auburn versus Florida. For the Iowa-Michigan game, obviously if Michigan loses, we know all the chaos that's going to happen there. But I think Michigan turned it around a little bit last week. and they play better at home. I think they're going to actually pull off the win here. I know I was ranked higher, so it's going to be a good win for Michigan. I think it's going to give them more momentum. For Iowa, it's going to be the first of a handful of losses this year. Iowa's a good team. I like their toughness, but I don't think they have the firepower offensively to win in an offensive battle. And then you go to Auburn, Florida. I honestly like Auburn. They made me a believer after they beat Oregon in week 1. They beat Texas A&M also a couple games ago. They've beat 2 ranked teams. Florida hasn't beaten a ranked team. I look over their schedule, and you could say, oh, well, Kentucky's good. Well, Kentucky's not as good as Oregon or Texas A&M. Tennessee's not as good as them. Miami's not as good as them. As far as I'm concerned, Florida hasn't played anybody that I would consider as good as anybody on Auburn's schedule. Auburn's defense is tremendous. I think they have the advantage at quarterback. I think they have the advantage in physicality. I'm going with Auburn to win this game. And honestly, I think after this, Florida's done. Like in that conference, you still got to play tough teams. This is the first real tough test. I think Auburn's the one team that can really win these early games and set themselves up, for the big showdowns against some of the other big SEC favorites.
I don't think the loser of that game is fully done necessarily, just because it is the SEC, and we know they get a favorable, draw from the committee every year. Florida goes to LSU next week. They play Georgia later in the season. If they do somehow win the SEC East and they somehow beat Alabama or LSU or Auburn in the SEC title game, then they're very much alive, obviously, in the playoff scenario. So I don't think losing this one game to Auburn necessarily means they're dead, whereas Auburn also plays LSU and Georgia and Alabama down the stretch. So I do think these teams both have a chance to redeem themselves, whichever loses. So my team this week is Michigan. I think they were already on thin ice before the Rutgers game. I don't think that sold anybody on Michigan being a good team. If they lose to Iowa, they're just dead. Even if they win a close game against Iowa, I think they're dead. I think patience has run thin from the committee people with this team just because they barely beat Army. They got crushed by Wisconsin. I just don't think a close win against Iowa is going to do it. I think they have to blow them out, and I think they pretty much have to run the table after that.
Michigan was my team, I think, a week ago in this segment because I don't think Michigan – I think they're basically dead. They'd have to win out, and they'd have to beat Ohio State by like 35 to even stand a remote chance of getting into the college football playoff. When it comes to Auburn, Florida, I agree with what Taylor was saying. Florida could still win the SEC East if they lose this week or next week to Auburn or LSU. If Florida loses this week, they will be my pick next week because if they lose to LSU, then they're done. But if they lose to Auburn and then beat LSU and then beat Georgia in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party in Jacksonville, which I think they're trying to not use that name anymore, but tough. If they then go to the SEC championship game, we've seen that any team that plays in the SEC championship game or the second best team in the SEC West is still fair game to be placed in the college football playoff, win or lose in that game. So I wouldn't write off either yet. I'd be closer to writing off Auburn with a loss than I would be Florida because I think Auburn's path to getting into the conference championship game becomes way tougher if they end up losing this weekend.
They're definitely, yeah, I think that's a good point. I just think there's no way they're going to beat Georgia, LSU, and Alabama to get into that game in the first place.
If Florida can't even beat Auburn, what makes you think they're going to beat Georgia or LSU? Like, they're done. They can't beat those teams. That's my whole point.
In the East than Auburn does in the West.
Exactly. And losing to Auburn
this week, the season's done this weekend.
Their season. I went to Florida State. If I'm telling you the Gators won't be dead if they lose this weekend, I'm not like missing something. The Gators are, if they lose both this week and next week, they're dead in the water. If they lose one of the two, all they have to do is beat Georgia to get to the conference championship game.
They're not going to beat Georgia.
But that would be what would kill them. It's not losing to Auburn. It would be losing to Georgia when they had already lost the conference game. My team this week is not necessarily a team that's currently contending, but it's a team that will be absolutely out of it. Just knock it off with them is Michigan State. They're playing Ohio State. They're a team that if they end up picking up a win, the Big Ten just becomes, a free-for-all other than Wisconsin, where Wisconsin has the path to the championship game, but Michigan State could theoretically have its own path to the national championship. I don't see them picking up a win this weekend against the Buckeyes, but if they don't, the Spartans are done for the year, which would be unfortunate because Taylor and I had found like a series of Sparty, their mascot, gifs, just him dancing. If you go to Google in a new tab, keep this one open. If you go to Google and you just search Sparty GIF, it's hilarious. I don't know what they did this with, but there's just him doing a bunch of dance moves. So Michigan State's my pick. Florida will be my pick next week if they lose to Auburn. I think they're going to lose to Auburn. I don't know whose bright idea it was for the Gators to schedule Auburn as their homecoming opponent, but they did that too. A little mistake in Gainesville there with the scheduling. Michigan was my team last week. Otherwise, I'd say against Iowa, this would be a win or go home. But Michigan State's the team that holds the key to the Big Ten this week, I think. Because if they were to upset the Buckeyes, then Michigan's not dead as long as they beat Iowa. But Wisconsin would suddenly be the absolute favorite to get to the college football playoff. Michigan State's my pick for this week. I will be picking Florida next week if they lose this week. And Auburn would be my pick when they either play UGA or Bama or LSU. I forget which one they play first. But if they lose this weekend, I think they're 2 losses away. Neither has a loss yet. That's why I'm going to hold off on saying that Florida or Auburn could be done after this weekend. We've got to talk about the new law in the state of California, especially with other states and even possible federal legislation to follow. The Fair Pay to Play Act is making it illegal for colleges and universities in California to punish student athletes for accepting endorsements, which is a dramatic shift of power away from the NCAA. This legislation would not take effect, or will not take effect. It has been signed into law by the governor. Will not take effect until 2023. So there is still a few years for the NCAA to get their stuff together and maybe do something. Taylor, let's get your thoughts first on the impact of what this might do for college athletics. And do you like it or do you dislike it?
I like it. It's something that needed to happen. Someone needed to get momentum growing for this. Isn't, schools paying players. This is players being able to seek out their own endorsement deals and be paid for what they're worth, basically. The schools are already making tons of money off of these people, notably the star athletes, which are the ones that are obviously going to benefit the most from it. The NCAA, we've seen, a lot of talk about this over the last few years about paying players, paying athletes to play college sports, notably football, basketball, the big ones. The NCAA was never going to actually take this issue up themselves without someone essentially forcing their hand. And while this isn't schools paying players, this is at least something that is a step in the right direction. And I think, we see all these people in charge, like the commissioners and Mark Emmert, crying foul about it, saying, this takes the amateurism out of amateur sports and it's the professionalization of college sports and things like that, which is just something that rings hollow from these people that make millions of dollars a year because of these athletes. And the athletes, at least on the up and up, don't see anything from it. So it's not the final step. The final step, obviously, is these athletes being paid by the schools eventually at some point, or by the NCAA or whoever. But someone needed to do this. Someone needed to at least make the NCAA think about it. Other states are going to follow. Colorado, Florida, a handful of others have already started to introduce similar legislation. Like I said, it's something that brought the issue back to the forefront. It's something that needed to happen. So I think it's a good step. It's not the final step, but at least we're talking about it.
First of all, if California was really brave and bold, they would have put this law into effect next year and not wait another 4 years to do so. Second of all, let me get to this point. I got a lot of points. I agree. I think we all can agree that the NCAA sucks in terms of how they run collegiate sports, especially college football, which is arguably the biggest moneymaker for most of the major universities throughout the country. But this law, unless it becomes federal, creates an uneven playing field within just the players themselves. I have concerns over what's going to happen with high school students. Are we going to get people giving endorsements and chasing after the top high school recruits now. It was a huge fiasco when we talked about boosters doing this illegally and giving illegal money and stuff like that. How's it going to be any better? Just because it's legal doesn't make it better ethically. Like these kids, you don't even know if they're going to be great or not. You don't know any of that until they actually play. Another thing, nobody's forcing them to play in college football. They can go to Canada. They can go elsewhere. So I don't want to sit here and hear, oh, well, we're not getting paid. Well, last I checked, nobody said you have to play college football to do something with your life. I understand they have talents, and I understand these talents are going to take them further in life, but nobody's forcing them to play college football. You got the XFL coming. Wait another year to go play in the XFL. If you're over 18, 19, 20, whatever you are in college, why can't you just go do that? You'll get paid. Here's my biggest point with this law, though, because those all can be argued. You can debate that stuff. This is my biggest point. It's not fair. If you're trying to create fairness, this is not fair within a team. This creates division on a team. I've played organized sports my whole life. I'm telling you, if only 3 or 4 people can benefit the most from a team because they might be more athletically gifted, what about the rest of the team? How's the rest of the team going to get paid? They're not everybody's going to be able to go get endorsements. Just because you open it up for endorsements doesn't mean it's going to be fair for everybody's playing. I thought the whole goal was to make it fair for all the athletes. Why is it only fair for the talented ones or the popular ones? Nobody's going to pay a punter anything because, as Drew says, punter aren't even people. Well, how's a punter going to get paid? Huh?
I have to just jump in really quick. Punters are people. It's just that I don't factor them in when I'm deciding who will win or lose a football game. They can have an impact. I was at a Florida State-Alabama game in Jacksonville in 2007, and Alabama's punter, who actually went to my high school, so sorry, PJ, but he was basically in that game, he was kicking against the win the whole game, and every one of his punts went like 20 or 30 yards instead of going 45 to 55, and that did change the game against his team. But punters are people. Just to throw that out there, they just are not impact players in the same way. Continue with your rant. I'm taking notes, so I'm going to be able to go bullet by bullet point here.
Because Drew hates punters, these punters aren't even going to get endorsements. I mean, come on now. So your star quarterback gets paid, right, playing college football. Well, what about the punter? What about the backup quarterback? What about half the offensive line that nobody knows? And let's get to this point. Now everybody's going to want to play in California or a state that sits here and allows this. What about states that don't allow this? Like I mentioned when we briefly discussed this yesterday, what if Indiana and Pennsylvania don't do that? And 2 of the biggest football programs, Notre Dame and Penn State, they don't get to have endorsed players. Are their players going to leave? Are we going to have mass transfers now? Because they're going to go to states where, well, we want to get paid. We want money. Like this is a big cluster right now. I'm glad they said in a couple years, because hopefully it become a federal law where something gets modified so all players get paid. But this endorsement deal, this is booty, all right? This is booty because not everybody benefits from it. And so what we have here is this. People want to argue and say, well, the people say it's not amateur anymore, it's professionalism. Well, they're making all the money, so that's not fair for them to say. Okay, well, so we want to create a fair law so all the college players can get paid, but they're not all going to get paid. Who's going to pay people from Boise State if you can pay people from Florida State? Or unless it's a local town sponsor. Hello, they don't have the budget to pay everybody on Boise State. It's not fair. Not everybody's going to get paid. Not everybody's going to make money. And it's going to cause a shift. It's going to cause more problems right now unless it gets to a federal level where it can be regulated and balanced throughout all the schools where everybody on a college team gets paid and not just the best players. This is a disaster waiting to happen. This is going to be insane. I don't care if, the top players get endorsed. I don't care. What I care about is the bottom 5 players on the team that don't get endorsements. What about them? They work just as hard. They're just as valuable to the team as a star player.
No, they're not.
Yes, they're literally not. That's why they're the bottom 5 players and not the star player.
If the star player doesn't have other teammates around, how's he going to be a star player?
I think they're just as valuable as the star player.
They're just as valuable to the team in terms of constructing the team, ensuring the team,
All right, hold on. I've got like 15 bullet points for you here, so I'm going to cut you off really quick. I'm going to finish responding to that because yes, the scout team, the walk-ons that do assist, are absolutely valuable. So I'm going to go in order of what you said here, though, if you don't mind, because I literally I'm only responding.
Punters are people, okay? Drew, punters are people.
I agree. Punters are people. That's I think, Taylor, do you agree with that? Can we all get on board with punters are people?
Sure.
Okay, punters are people. Good. We've established some common ground. All right. So starting with what you started with, at first you said that it should be next year if California had any courage and not 2023. And then later you said that you were glad that they did it so that maybe the federal could get in. I think that's the whole point, is that California made this and purposely put it 3 years out so that current high school seniors that will be signing later this year or early next year to play college football won't really be impacted by this because they'd have to sit out a full year. So maybe their redshirt senior year or their senior year, they might be impacted by this, but it shouldn't actually have an impact on this graduating class. So if the NCAA can act in the next 13 months, this will not have an impact on recruiting. Federal versus state. I agree that a federal law would be fantastic, but as Taylor said, this is getting things going. This is the groundwork that's being laid because California, when it was passed and sent to the governor's desk, since then, South Carolina has had legislation. Taylor pointed out Florida, others. There's even someone from Ohio is proposing federal legislation. So it was California that sparked it, that basically said, you know what, this is ridiculous. We can just take care of this. Let's at least take care of our own and hope that we start something. And that appears to be what has happened. You talked about high school students. Will we be seeing high school students recruited? Well, we already do because there's a bunch of people who were from, I believe it was Louisville, who ended up being fired. I believe that there were national championship banners removed from basketball because representatives of Nike or Adidas or whichever schools it was were going to high school seniors and encouraging them financially to sign with schools that wear their athletic brand. So we had a federal case about it where we had arrests made and we've had banners taken down because of this. And now we're saying, yes, it's okay. And along those lines, by the way, every baby boomer's favorite line is, why don't you get a job, right? When you're talking about, the millennials and below that and younger than that, when they're in high school and college, why don't you get a job? This is literally them getting a job. It is literally a job that they're using the skills that they have to go out and get work. So that's a good thing. Talk about boosters.
A small percentage.
Yes, but everyone is able to, but yes, it will only be a few. I'm going to get to that in a minute because I'm going in your order. Boosters. Yeah, this should actually have a pretty decent impact on that because it takes that really shady side of college sports. With every major program is going to have boosters, and if you think that Cam Newton is the only player during his era that was being paid to go to a school, you're out of your mind. The fact that Auburn just happened to get outed for it is why they got in trouble. It's not because they did it. It's because they got caught. Will they be great? You don't know, so how do you do this? Well, that's a business decision that if basically these businesses believe they're going to be worth it, NBA draft picks, NFL draft picks, MLB draft picks, even the ones straight out of high school, NHL draft picks, all get endorsement deals at 18, 19, 20, 21. They have not proven a thing at a professional level. They have not proven the ability to do anything. I would bet you Ryan Leaf had endorsements when he was drafted into the NFL. He was a bust. There are plenty of busts who end up with endorsements, and you know what? It's a risk that these companies take, but they end up signing so many people. Nike signs so many athletes nationwide that the ones that don't work out, they make up for with the ones that they do sign. Not forced to play because you can go to other leagues. Not really. I don't know if the CFL or XFL specifically have age requirements, but the NFL does. That's kind of the reason that my whole argument with this is that the athletes that absolutely need to be paid are football and basketball, because whether on the books or not, the NCAA and the NBA and NFL have worked together to ensure that these athletes have to spend some time under the NCAA banner. They cannot enter the draft until they are 21 or 19 years old. And if you go back to someone like LeBron James or Kobe Bryant or anyone who went straight from high school, the NCAA really didn't like that, which is why you have all of the one and dones. So no, can't just go elsewhere. We've seen that with Which of the Ball kids that went to Europe. But
is he getting paid in Europe?
He is getting paid in Europe.
Thank you.
But it's not as realistic of a path, because what ends up happening is that is looked down upon. And it's something where you are basically, in order to get into the NFL, you have to play college football. If you can name me a single player who's been drafted in the last 10 years in the NFL draft, rounds 1 through 7, who was not a college football player, then I will withdraw that remark. And you can tell me afterwards, you can do any research you want, and I will add it as a note on the video if you want that to happen. Not fair within a team because the star QB versus the backup QB. Interesting point, because this is one of my favorite parts about having tiered salaries available. Because right now, there's nothing that stops Alabama from recruiting the 4 best wide receiver prospects in the country every year. But if that 4th best receiver prospect going to Auburn or UCLA might make it more profitable for them, suddenly you get a better competitive balance, because the backup QB at USC might want to play at USC, but he may never play. He may sign as the 2nd best quarterback recruit in the country, but the best quarterback recruit in the country might also sign. And if he goes to UCLA instead, or Cal, or any of these other schools, he might actually have a much more profitable career. So it encourages competitive balance, which I think is a great thing. You said Notre Dame can't have player endorsements. Well, there's nothing stopping a university from refusing to obey the NCAA, especially a school like Notre Dame, which is not part of an NCAA's division. They're just a team that plays under the NCAA banner. Yes, they're members of the ACC outside of football, but they've got their own television contract. There's absolutely nothing that prevents Notre Dame specifically and especially from deciding that they are going to abide by California's rules, because Indiana doesn't have a law that says you can't have college players get endorsements. It's not prohibited. It's only prohibited by the NCAA. But if they look at it and go, blood in the water. Okay, starting in 2023, Notre Dame will not punish student athletes for signing endorsements. You think what's the NCAA going to do? They're technically a charity. They're technically a not-for-profit organization. What are they going to do? Are they going to kick Notre Dame out of the NCAA? Absolutely not. And you know what? If they do, then the SEC, the ACC, all of the Power 5 schools decide to go independent, and they create their own thing, which hopefully is what ends up happening.
That's just
the Boise State. Hold on, I'm still only responding to you.
Burn it all down. You're like Seth Rollins. Burn it down.
Boise State. Why would you pay Boise State players if you can pay Florida State players or Florida players? Well, if your business is in Idaho, it would make a whole lot more sense to have the local player, because the Broncos are a big deal in Boise, and especially if you go back to Zabransky and that era. If you were in, what year was that? Was that 2009? So I think it was 2009 or 2006. But anyway, if you were a Boise-based business in that year, would you rather have signed? I'm trying to even think who the quarterback would have been at Florida State, because I was there at that time, so I should remember. But would you rather have Zabransky, who is a known name within Boise, or would you rather have, any receiver or quarterback from the 2007 Florida State Seminoles, who is completely irrelevant in Boise? Now, the other interesting thing, though, is that if it's a kid who grew up in Boise who plays at USC, that would be something that you could do. But yeah, I think it's beneficial, because you're going to get any college town business is going to want an endorsement from that college. And if they can get the star quarterback, the star point guard, whatever, from whatever their university is, it's going to play well in their home market. You care about the bottom 5 players, not the top 5 players. Well, that's great. But if you're talking about salaries anyway, they wouldn't be making a fraction of what the bigger guys are. It's commonplace in professional teams where the players that make the most money might treat, if they're just feeling friendly, might treat their offensive linemen. How many times has Tom Brady bought dinner for his offensive line? He makes 10 times what they do. By the way, I had also marked down, because you said the offensive linemen that nobody knows, it's unfair to them. Well, in this participation trophy culture that you're trying to preach here, I guess that would be a thing where if everybody gets a trophy and everybody gets an endorsement, that's the only time it's okay. But I do agree with you. One thing that this will open up is when schools have their student athletes sit around for 3 hours to sign autographs for their fans. Now boosters can actually fund it. The university could technically pay it because it was technically an endorsement instead of just being given the standard meal that they always get. So that was responding to you. Let's let Taylor get back in. He sat nice and quietly for 20 minutes. I also need a breather. Anything you want to add? Because I was only responding to Rick.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see the downside necessarily. This is kind of opening the door for those bottom 5 players to potentially get paid by the schools or by the NCAA down the line. And I think that's something those players themselves would even vouch for. If this is something that eventually, benefits everybody, I don't see the downside of these best athletes. And I think the worst players on the team will acknowledge that they don't necessarily deserve the Chevy endorsement contract that Tua Tagovailoa can get or whatever, So it's we see the same thing in the pros. And if you cry about the professionalization of college sports, then that's just not a real argument that has any tangible value. That's just, I forget the term, but.
Along those lines, what I would say is this, because one of the biggest opponents of paying college athletes, at least vocally as far as the coaching ranks go, is Dabo Swinney at Clemson, which it really is terrible because I really want to like Clemson because it's not Alabama and Alabama's been the only team. But anyway, this is my pitch then, is to someone like Dabo Swinney or any other coaches or athletic directors that are preaching that you've got to maintain amateur status. Fine. But at the end of every school year, you will only get to keep a percentage of your salary that matches the percentage of players at all of your athletics teams that you either coach or oversee that are drafted into the pros every year. That is it. Everyone else is amateur. So if you are Clemson, you're Dabo Swinney, and you make, I think, $8 or $10 million a year, if 7% of the players that leave your program in 2019-2020 are drafted into the NFL, you only get to keep 7 to 8% of your annual salary. Everything else has to go back to the players that graduated and never became professional athletes. That would have to go to that. If you want to, that is my pitch to those coaches, is that if you want to say that you need to maintain amateur status because these players are going to get paid when they're professionals, then you, out of your own pocket, based on a percentage of players that go pro, should pay the ones that don't when they graduate. I'm cool with that too, as far as not paying players. If that's what the coaches want to do, if they want to take a percentage of their own salary and give it to split it amongst all the players that get their degree but don't go pro, cool. But it's not going to happen. This is a good first step.
Virtue signaling, and I don't think that really resonates with people anymore. I think some people may buy that and think, oh yeah, it really sucks that college football is not going to be what it once was, where I guess that's just the people in general that like things the way they used to be, but it's not realistic anymore. It's, the times are changing. The tide has turned on this thing. I think there's more and more support every day for the idea of paying college athletes because they are basically school employees at this point, always have been. And if this is something that gets the ball rolling in the right direction, I don't see why it's a bad thing. That's the bottom line for me.
Because it's not a level playing field yet. It's incomplete right now. It's not fair to everybody yet. If we're trying to create a fair system for everybody that's a college football player,
it is fair for everyone. If you're good enough, you can get it.
It's not. It's only one. It's only going to be a handful. Until it's federal, it's not fair for all 50 states.
But here's the thing.
But it's up to those states to decide whether they want to do it. And if they want to fall behind, that's their own decision.
I agree, but that punishes the college football players then. And if we're creating another professional league, then are we going to start fining players who get suspended?
Yes.
So we're basically creating another NFL. If that's the case, why not? If that
people treat it like
but it's not a level playing field. That's the whole point.
You can gamble on it just like you can gamble on pro sports.
Until the whole college football aspect is a level playing field, it's not fair. It's just
a level playing field to begin with.
Players.
So, Rick, tell me this, because I'm going to take two teams from the FBS that are technically on the same playing field, that are technically both competing for spots in the college football playoff. Explain to me how, in the current system, Appalachian State and Alabama are on the same playing field. Are they currently on a level playing field?
In terms of talent? No, everybody goes down.
Okay, so would Appalachian State and Alabama not be on would they still not be on a level playing field? If anything, this would actually make Appalachian State closer to Bama, because at least if you're the star player at App State, you could get an endorsement locally.
What about the rest of the players? Why is it just about the star players?
Because they're the ones. Okay, here's the thing, and I'll go back to your example with a punter.
They're all employees and they all should get paid. That's my whole argument.
I agree with you. That's the next thing. This is part one. This is a step. This is a good step in the right direction. But I'll go back to what you said. Here's the thing. Have you been at college football games or been around them and been in an atmosphere where people are wearing jerseys and shirts and celebrating and cheering on their teams? You have, right? How many of those jerseys have numbers on them?
Most of them do.
All of them. There's no such thing as a blank college football jersey. There's no such thing as it's just a crimson t-shirt if it's an Alabama football jersey without a number. All of them have numbers. How many of those numbers match up with a player that you can either remember if you have paid attention to the school at all, or to an active player on the roster? All of them. Except the only exception is that most schools will sell a number one jersey, a jersey number one. But in a lot of cases, there's a really good player in history that has worn the number one at those schools. So like when I was at Florida State, I had a number 3 jersey, which was a Myron Roll jersey, but it didn't say Roll on the back, and he didn't get paid. And it had come out a few years ago that you could have searched Johnny Manziel on the official NCAA team, like the official NCAA online store. If you typed in Johnny Manziel when he was playing at A&M, the blank Texas A&M number 2 jerseys would all come up. They had you were able to search for that. So all that would change is that when you search for Johnny Manziel on the NCAA's official team store, going back to when he was playing, now Tua Tagovailoa. If you search Tua Tagovailoa, they've changed it because they got caught again. But if you're looking for an Alabama jersey, if you're looking for a Clemson jersey, and you're looking for the star quarterback, and you find their number, all that would change is that when you hit checkout and complete payment, the player would get $5. There's nothing that would prevent you from going and buying the punter's jersey. And if you bought the punter's jersey with his name on it, the punter would get $5. But what this does is that it allows at least the NCAA is already selling merchandise off of the backs of these players, specific players. Jameis Winston sold thousands of jerseys when he was at Florida State. He got nothing for it. Didn't even get a degree because he left early. But he got $0 for it. Florida State marketed Jameis Winston jerseys and sold Jameis Winston jerseys. They weren't coincidentally selling the number 5. They were selling Jameis Winston jerseys because everybody wanted a Winston jersey the year that he was quarterbacking the team to a national championship, and the next year when he took them back to the playoff. Everyone wanted a number 5 FSU jersey if they were buying an FSU jersey. So they marketed them. Now the players that are being marketed already by their schools would just get compensated for it. That's really what it comes down to. Not to mention, the biggest point, and my favorite thing about this, is that once it goes federal, the NCAA football video games are going to come back, because that means that the players can negotiate with EA Sports. Now the players can get, it might be $500 a pop, but that's where the 5th string right guard is going to get money. And it's going to be an equivalent amount to the star quarterback, because it's going to be a team-by-team NCAA College Football Players Association negotiated rate, where they'll do profit sharing with the schools and the EA Sports, 30 33%, and it'll be divided amongst all of the players featured. 118 or 120 teams, whatever it is, divided by the 100 players per team. It's like $500 a player. Everyone gets that. They're not, I mean, everybody who's in the game gets that. The walk-ons, the practice squad, scout teams aren't, because those players are probably not going to be made for the game. But anyone who's on the depth chart, anyone who dresses, is going to get paid out of that. I mean, and they'll sell them 10 million copies the first year they bring that game back. That's how they're going to make money. That's what this opens the door for. Without this, there is no NCAA football, because the NCAA decided that they'd rather make nothing off of it than share the money with the student athletes. They canceled the basketball game and the football game because of that. The basketball game may have been canceled a couple years before. But the football game, which was more popular than Madden the last time it came out, they stopped production of it because the NCAA didn't want to split the revenue with players. Now they're forced to. And now it opens the door to bring that back, because now the players can go out and say, well, you can negotiate with the schools to get the rights, but if you want to dress the Cal Golden Bears as the Berkeley Bears, there's nothing that would stop EA from making a game that is licensed with all of the college football players in the country. Because we just saw a game called Maximum Football come out that does so without a college football license, that created a college football video game that basically does that, where it's like, oh, it's the Tallahassee Tribe instead of the Florida State Seminoles. Or the I like Marshall, the Thundering Herd, was like the Huntington Bison or something. There's nothing that would prevent EA from doing that. We saw that years ago with like Ken Griffey Jr. Presents Major League Baseball on the Super Nintendo that I grew up playing, where Griffey was the only player in the game. Nobody else in Major League Baseball got a dime out of it other than the teams, because they just signed a deal with Griffey. That's basically what we're going towards. I'm excited about it. I think there's a great first step. I agree with you, Rick. They need to be paid. They need to be compensated. Every player who's on the roster needs to be paid if they're going to be signing these multi-billion-dollar TV deals and coaches making 6, 7, 8 figures a year. This is a first step towards that. This is finally allowing at least a chunk of college athletes to profit off of them, and allows all college athletes the opportunity to seek compensation out. The NHL season is officially underway. The St. Louis Blues have raised their 2019 Stanley Cup Championship banner in their season opener, which happened the night before we recorded this segment. That was an overtime win for the Washington Capitals. The Blues come in at plus 1,400 odds to repeat as Stanley Cup champions behind 5 other NHL teams. Betting favorites this year, reigning President's Trophy winners, the Tampa Bay Lightning, who would pay out at plus 675 odds with a championship win. The Vegas Golden Knights, right behind the Bolts, they're the betting favorites in the Western Conference with plus 850 odds to win the Cup. Rick, which teams jump out to you as Stanley Cup contenders this year?
You know, when I really started sitting down and thinking about this, other than knowing this is going to be Drew's favorite segment of the podcast, I started thinking, initially I wanted to go with Vegas. And then I started thinking, if we learned anything from last postseason in the NHL, is we don't know anything when it comes to these teams playing. And I think out of all the professional sports leagues, this is probably the one where you should avoid making a future bet like this, because the uncertainty from that postseason has to have left scars on some sports bettors with the upsets or just all the twists and turns. It was TV-wise, it was compelling with what was going on. I wouldn't even touch this right now. Like, I wanted to say the Golden Knights, that was going to be my initial reaction answer, but when I thought about it more and we looked over the odds and I started seeing all these teams and that teams, I started thinking any one of those teams could win it. Any one of those teams could run away with the regular season, come into the playoffs and just choke like they were doing last season. You can get teams that people thought would lose in the first round, make it deep. I'm not touching this. And if you want to be smart, don't touch this right now. Stay away. If you want to take a future bet, go look at the NBA or something. Bet on the Clippers or somebody like that who actually has a legitimate shot at winning. Right now, you got like 6 teams, and that's only right now. You can get to the playoffs, you get like 16 teams. I'm not touching it. I'm done.
One of the recurring bits we had back when we started the show was we'd have a bet to avoid, and during the playoffs, I would just say whatever hockey game was going on that weekend. So yeah, Rick kind of said it all. I think you can maybe bet on the President's Trophy winner. Maybe that's something that's a little more predictable than what will happen in the playoffs, just based on the chaos we saw last year. One team I do like, and I liked them last year, is Dallas. You can get them at plus 1,600 to win the Stanley Cup. They beat Nashville in the first round. They took the Blues to 7 games in the second round. That's a team that easily could have gone on to win it. St. Louis obviously did after that. They added Joe Pavelski as a free agent this offseason. They also signed Corey Perry. I don't really have huge expectations for Corey Perry. He's 34, coming off knee surgery, but that's not a bad player to buy low on. That's a guy that's been among the best in the NHL over the past decade. So, they can see if he has anything left in the tank. It's not like they're really relying on him. They'll be fine regardless of whether he's, a capable contributor. Just like I was saying, plus 1,600 is pretty decent value on a team that on paper looks pretty good. Anything can happen in the playoffs. One puck bounces their way, and the Blues are out last year, and they're moving on. So I think you can just take long shot bets like this. I wouldn't take anything plus under 1,000, plus 1,000 probably, just because – it's an 82-game season. Anything can happen between now and April and May. Maybe bet on the regular season champion before betting on the Stanley Cup champion.
All right, I'm going to give you guys a breather for a couple minutes because I'm going to dive into this division by division and then conference by conference. So here we go, because Rick is right. This is my favorite part. Yeah, thank you, Taylor. You're good to go. Take a breather, use the restroom, grab a drink of water, whatever you need to do. All right. In the division play, because you can bet on a division winner. In the Metropolitan, the Washington Capitals seem to me like they'd be the favorites in that. They're available at plus 350 just to win the Metro division. I think that's really good value for a team that has Alexander Ovechkin. Braden Holtby's still a really good goaltender. They've got Backstrom. They've got a really good team. One team in the Metro that I'm a big fan of this year, and I don't know that I would take them to go further than this, but is a little bit of a flyer at plus 500, and that wasn't a pun because it's not Philadelphia as much as I like Gritty. The New Jersey Devils added PK Subban via trade in the offseason. They still have Taylor Hall. They had the first overall pick in this year's NHL draft. They stand to be one of the better or more improved teams in the National Hockey League, I think, this year. What's going to be difficult for them is the division they play in because they've still got Pittsburgh. They've got the Rangers, who were improved after signing Artemi Panarin. They also got Kaapo Kakko in the NHL draft. They could be a very good team as well. They're another one to look at. In the Atlantic, 3 teams. Tampa Bay, obvious, they're plus 110 to win the division. That seems like a bit of a given. Toronto's plus 275 to win the Atlantic. I think the Maple Leafs are, at some point, they've got to make a move because it's been decades. We've been waiting for the Toronto Maple Leafs to finally step up and get back into that kind of contention. This could be a year. They've had a year to gel together. Maybe they do after getting a couple contracts taken care of. Maybe this is the year the Leafs might win the division. A long shot is the Florida Panthers. If you want to talk about a team that made moves in the offseason, Sergei Bobrovsky landing with the Florida Panthers, plus 650 odds for them to win the division. It's really going to come down to if they can beat Tampa head-to-head a bunch during the regular season in their matchups, that's going to drive the Bolts down in the standings, and it's going to push Florida up. This is a team that I think is going to make the playoffs this year. It's a team that I think is going to be capable of doing something. And if you wanted a flyer at 65 to 1, I think the Panthers are not a bad deal. In the Central Division, going to the West now, St. Louis and Dallas are both available plus 400. I prefer the Stars in this situation. Joe Pavelski, a big addition. As Taylor mentioned, they're a very good team. I think they're they're not necessarily a flashy team, but they're a very good team. They're strong, they're consistent. I really like them. It's a tough division. Winnipeg also at plus 500. The Jets have re-signed a couple players this offseason. I think that they're a team that could contend for that title as well. If you were to basically bet $10 or $100 on St. Louis, Dallas, and Winnipeg, you would come out ahead as long as one of those 3 won the division. So that is technically something that you could do as well. In the Pacific, Vegas, the only favorite that is actually at minus odds to win their division, minus 110. I wouldn't make that bet even if I think the Golden Knights are the favorites. If you're looking for the longer shots, San Jose at plus 420 is interesting. I would be waiting to see what has happened because they had a couple players that either left the game against Vegas on opening night or had to sit out the game. So I would see what is going on with that before betting on the Sharks. The other team at plus 420 is Calgary. And the Flames are just a team where if things go right, which they did last year, the Flames could be contenders for that spot. It would have to go right for Calgary and wrong for Vegas. The Golden Knights had Nate Schmidt get hurt last night in that game against San Jose. It looked like a knee-to-knee collision with Logan Couture. If that does hurt the Golden Knights, Calgary could step up, San Jose could step up, and those plus 420 odds could really pay off long-term, especially if Schmidt ends up missing considerable time. As far as the conference winners go, Tampa and Vegas are basically very short odds, probably still maybe worth a shot at it, but Washington plus 1,000, Florida plus 1,000, Pittsburgh plus 1,200 for a team with Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. That seems like really good value to me. The Devils, which again are the team that I think are going to be very good this season, but I don't know how deep they'll go in the playoffs, are plus 1,400. In the West, Vegas plus 375, Colorado plus 475, Dallas is plus 700, probably my favorite pick. Winnipeg at plus 1,100, or Calgary at plus 900 might be worth a flyer. Stanley Cup winners, Tampa plus 675, Vegas plus 850, Dallas plus 1,600. I think it might be good value. Winnipeg at plus 2,200 could be, but also at plus 2,200 is the Pittsburgh Penguins. And it's one of those situations where if you think that a team with Crosby and Malkin and Matt Murray and the team that they built, I know that Phil Kessel is now playing in the desert for the Arizona Coyotes, but to get Crosby, Malkin, and Murray and the cast surrounding them at 22-1, there are not 21 teams better than the Pittsburgh Penguins this year. For me, there's really good value with that. I don't know that it would pay out, but the Pittsburgh Penguins at 22-1 to win the Stanley Cup or 12-1 to win the Eastern Conference, I think might be some of the best available value in the NHL this preseason. Rick and Taylor, do you want to respond to that? Because I'm going to get up and I'm going to grab a swig of water really quick. So feel free to make a remark really quick if you'd like.
So, Taylor, yeah, I didn't hear anything about my Buffalo Sabres mentioned in there. You know,
That's interesting about Pittsburgh.
All right, let me tell you about the Buffalo Sabres, all right? In all seriousness, though, the Sabres are a team that I always think is going to break out, but they never do. And at this point, I've kind of given up on them until they've proven that they can make the playoffs once. They are, if you could find a bet that's better than 1-to-1 payout for them to make the playoffs, maybe, but I still wouldn't take it because so many other teams in the East are so improved this season that you're already going to have at least 2 or 3 playoff teams from a year ago missing or coming really close to missing because Florida didn't make the playoffs last year. They really should this year. You've got the Devils and the Rangers didn't make the playoffs last year. They both should be contending for playoff spots. So a team like the Sabres, they should be very well improved, but I still think that they're only going to be like the 4th most or 5th most improved team in the Eastern Conference. So that's why I wouldn't really take them as a playoff bet. Let's talk some combat sports. This is something Rick I know would really like to discuss. So let's move on to UFC 243. It's coming up on Saturday at Marvel Stadium in Melbourne, Australia. Headline bout features a middleweight championship match between Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker. Whittaker, who's the champion, is an even money plus 100 underdog against the last style bender Adesanya, who is the interim champion. Adesanya available at minus 130 moneyline odds. Rick, who will leave Melbourne as the undisputed middleweight champion of the world?
You know, I remember when hockey used to be a combat sport, but I'm just going to leave that alone for now. This is going to be an epic fight. This has 5 rounds written all over it. I really like the matchup because they're both fearless strikers and they both have their own styles coming into this. You know, Israel, he's got those kicks. He's probably got the advantage with kicks, but you can't sleep on Whittaker's kicking game because he had some he dictated the fight against Romero. I can't remember if it was the first or the second one, using the kick as like a jab. And then when you get into the distance, Israel has the advantage there. He's got like a 6.5 reach advantage. He's 4 inches taller. So his goal is going to be to keep it, you know, further apart, try and pick apart Whittaker, like he did with Gastelum, who at times looked good, put the pressure on, got in close, roughed him up a little bit and stuff like that. Whittaker's better than Gastelum. Whitaker is probably the best striker in the whole middleweight division. Not only is he good with some kicks, but he's probably faster in terms of his striking. He's probably got the power advantage as well. And I think he might even have a better ground game. I'm leaning towards Whitaker in this one. I'm excited for this fight because I can see it going both ways, but I really like Whitaker's toughness. I think Gastelum exposed some weaknesses with the interim champion, and I think Whitaker is going to be able to build off that. I think he's better in close quarters, where Gastelum looked like he was getting some points and racking up some rounds in that fight when he fought Israel earlier this year. I just like Whitaker in this one. I know it's been a while since he's been inside the octagon. You're getting the champ as an underdog at an even payout. The value's there also. Everything to me is pointing towards Whitaker getting the edge. I actually predicted it to be a split decision for Whitaker. I really think he has more advantages in this fight than his opponent does. But either way, no matter the outcome, it's going to be a fantastic fight. This is going to be one of the best fights of the year.
Yeah, these are two of the best strikers in the middleweight division. I think Adesanya might have a slight advantage in that regard, but it's comparable enough to where it's kind of a toss-up. You mentioned Whitaker not having fought in about a year. I think that's kind of a red flag. And I do like that Adesanya has that 7-inch reach advantage, like you also said. So I think I would take Adesanya as a slight favorite, but I do note that the value is better on Whitaker, so I would be tempted by the plus 100. I just think it's close enough to where you might as well just take the plus odds if you're going to actually bet on it.
Yeah, I would take Whitaker as far as a bet goes, because that 1-1 is just a nice payout to be able to get in a situation where you're betting on the champion, the non-interim champion. I really like Adesanya. I think that Israel Adesanya is a great fighter. I think he's an incredible personality, and I'm really excited to see this fight. I think that Whitaker, that layoff is going to be interesting to see what impact or what effect that may or may not have on it. It's also going to be interesting to see what Adesanya does against this caliber of competition, because his career over the span of it, he's taken very big steps from fight to fight as far as the competition that he's facing goes. And this Robert Whitaker is, I would think it has to be the biggest competition he's faced to this point in his young career. So I'm curious to see what he can do. I'd probably take Whitaker just because there's more of a known factor there, even if he's had that layoff and he's available at 1-1 payout. But I would not be shocked if Adesanya came away with a win in this situation. I could see it being split, as Rick said, if this ends up going the full 5 rounds. Rick, there are a number of other great fights that are on this card. We've got the co-main event between Dan Hooker and Ally Quinta is one of them. So aside from the main event, what fight on the card offers the best betting value from what you've seen?
There was really only two or three fights that even have close betting odds where they're within the main event, basically. The main event -1. I've seen the main event anywhere from Adesanya was -130 down to like -110, 112. Whitaker +100 to like -110. There's only one other fight that's even close to those kind of odds. So there's not a lot of betting opportunities in terms of saying, okay, well, you pick either fight or you're going to get good value. With that said, though, I really like the co-main event on this show because I think Raging Al has a chance to win this fight. I think people are writing him off because he lost to Cerrone, but that was an epic fight, and I don't think he had the best game plans for that fight. I think he might have underestimated Cowboy in that one. But I don't think he's going to underestimate Hooker in this fight. This is going to be a slugfest. This could end up being a 3-round war where it's a bloody mess, or someone can get knocked out in the first minute or two because these are two hard hitters, two sluggers, two people that want to knock out whoever they face inside the octagon. I like Raging Al in this fight. I think he has all the tools here to beat Hooker. I think he's a more proven commodity also. If you look at it, he's the one fighter that's given Khabib his toughest test. For all 5 rounds, he kept pushing the pace and putting the pressure on Khabib. He went the full 5 rounds with him. Like, I'm not ready to write off Raging Al. He's ranked 6th in division. Hooker's 15th. I think he's an underdog pick for this pay-per-view, and I think there could be a good payout to whatever they're at right now. I've seen them anywhere from plus 150 to 170, anywhere in between there for Raging Al.
Final topic for this week's podcast, the NASCAR Monster Energy Cup playoffs field has been trimmed from 16 down to 12, with Eric Almirola, Ryan Newman, Kurt Busch, and Eric Jones all being eliminated from the playoffs. Kyle Busch currently in first place, followed by Martin Truex Jr. and Denny Hamlin. This weekend, the drivers of the Monster Energy Cup Series head to Dover for the first race of the round of 12. They're going to the Monster, the big, it slipped my mind, Rick, the Monster Mile?
Yeah.
Thank you. I kept picturing the eyes of the giant monster out front, and I suddenly couldn't think straight. Kyle Busch and Martin Truex Jr. co-betting favorites for this race, each posting at plus 350 odds. Kevin Harvick, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott rounding out the top 5 favorites, all in that plus 500 to plus 650 range. Taylor, who do you like to win this weekend's race?
I'm going to be lame and say Kyle Busch. He's won this race 3 times, including earlier this season. 12 top 5 finishes on the year. He's led for about 1,200 laps over his last 27 races. I just see no reason to go against it. I think the odds are still profitable enough to where you might as well just take them. Plus 350 is pretty decent, so I'll be lame, like I said, take Kyle Busch.
You know, I thought about taking Busch also. Him and Truex have both won this at Dover 3 times. And they've alternated between wins. But another guy who's alternated in wins over the last couple of years at this track is Kevin Harvick. I think a lot of people are looking at, Joe Gibbs Racing, and rightfully so. They have the best drivers on there, Busch, Truex, and Hamlin. And Jones just got eliminated in the last round. First of all, I got Chase Elliott right last week in picking him to win, and he does have a legit chance at winning. He's this weekend. It's going to be funny if he or Truex win. They've swept all the playoff races so far, and that's not something that NASCAR was trying to get away from something like this when they created the whole playoff format of having one driver basically dominating all year long and making it boring. If these 2 guys just keep winning, it takes some of the thunder away from it. We need another legitimate contender in there. Kyle Busch would be a great choice, but he hasn't won in almost 4 months. Like he's in a slump right now in terms of winning races. He's been competitive, but he hasn't taken home a checkered flag. I like Kevin Harvick here. He's won multiple races here. He's won a fall race here before. He's raced well in the playoffs so far. He's won a couple races on the year. Other than Hamlin, he had the most momentum coming into the postseason. Like, I feel it's time for him to step up. I mean, honestly, when it comes to Dover at a short track, any of those favorites other than Kyle Larson, my hometown driver, could win it and should win it. If we're going to have to just pick one, I'm going with Harvick here. I could be a homer and pick Martin Truex Jr. because he's my favorite driver, or I could pick Larson because he's from here. Something about Harvick this weekend.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Odds On Favorites podcast. Make sure to check out gamblingsites.org, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and check back next week for another edition of the podcast. They've been Rick Rockwell and Taylor Smith. I'm Drew Goldfarb. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.